Layoffs. Just the word alone sends a chill down everyone's spine. But what goes on behind the scenes in those closed door meetings? And what is really driving those painful decisions? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on layoffs. And we are going to talk about why companies choose to do them, the impacts and the ripple effect on the rest of the teams, and how leaders really wrestle with the consequences. Stick around because it's time to get candid about why layoffs happen and what it truly means for the employees left behind.
Well, welcome, Cindy.
Hi, Jamie. This is a heavy topic, but we
This is
still are going
yeah,
to.
scary. It's everybody's biggest fear, right?
Right.
Layoffs. They happen all the time. We see announcements going on, and they're actually starting to happen with more frequency
Mhm.
this year as we are starting to see some ripples in the economy.
Right.
But what are they really like on the inside? And what is it going to be like this year? I think those are our two topics for today.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with why they happen. Right. And I can give my perspectives, but what do you think the history of layoffs has been? For me, it feels like this is a more recent thing, like in my lifetime kind of thing. This multi-generational, we don't see a lot of layoffs in their history.
No, so I think if you go way back, right? Layoffs were designed to be a big deal.
Mhm.
Something's going to happen. There's a big shift happening in the company. I'm going to lay people off. And we've got to go back to the point where you have your job for life, right? You've got
Right.
your defined benefit pension. That is the kind of mentality of that layoffs were this really big, infrequent occurrence that were happening.
Right.
They often happen only when companies were trying to save their butts from going under.
Right.
Right? Then we fast forward and we start going into the 1990s and we get the age of the defined contribution plan, which is very helpful. But we also have the GEs of the world kind of introducing layoffs, almost a performance management function, right? So
Yes.
the bottom 10% of my workers, we're going to stack rank them every year, and the bottom 10% are going to get laid off with what is happening. Now, that is a different connotation for layoffs than, say, what it was in the auto industry, because there were traditional layoffs there. That was when you had a reduction in manufacturing and you would temporarily lay them off.
Like
So
a
if we actually
furlough,
go back,
right?
yeah, it's furlough. That's the definition of a layoff, that you would be brought back. My twin sister actually works in a restaurant system that is at a university. And so during the fall and the spring, there's tons of students, there's tons of activity. They work with a union who fulfills their business.
Mhm.
But during the summer, they lay off about a half of their workforce. Why? Because there's no students on campus,
Right.
right? So they need a great reduction. So they get planned layoffs that are happening. So
Right.
there's a lot of different connotations about layoffs we're going to be talking about too. And that's where I'm very excited because you've been through
Yes,
these.
I have.
Confession, I never have been through a layoff.
Right.
I've only seen them from the finance side.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I
All right. So the
see. Yeah,
two
go
types,
for it. Two
right?
types. Go for it.
Small cuts
Yes.
that are happening. I'm going to lay off 3% of my workforce in an attempt to do some management cuts or whatever. Number two, my business is in trouble. I'm doing a huge layoff. It's going to be a massive change that's going on. Those are the two types we're going to be talking about today.
Right. Right.
Which type have you been through, or
Uh,
have you been through both?
I know I've been through the first one. So
Okay.
I've been through the first one. Well, actually, no, that's not true. I have been through both. So I forgot way back in the early dot coms when, when there was a lot of risk in the organization. I was known as if I walked into the network operations center or the security operations center, the rumors would start because I was the person who locked everybody out of the system. So yeah, you don't want to be that person. Oh my gosh, Cindy just went into the knock. There's going to be a layoff. You don't want to be that person. But yes, I've been through both. So if we think about, let's just talk about the second one first, like the bigger layoff, the
Yeah.
company's in trouble. That one actually makes a lot of sense. The company's in trouble. We don't know where our future revenue's coming from, or the market massively changed out from under us. And so we make deep, deep cuts so that we can attempt to survive. I think that one, while it's painful for everyone, actually seems to make logical sense to me, right? You can't just continue to operate a failing company and just drive it into the ground, not knowing where your next dollar is coming from. And I think you've got a couple of examples of companies that are going
Yeah,
through that right
there's
now.
some going on right now,
Yeah,
right? So AI, everybody's afraid AI is gonna take their jobs. Well, in a few cases, we have seen that happen.
right.
So, the biggest one right now, Chegg.
Mhm.
Chegg is a publicly traded company that, is I'm gonna call it a cheating company.
Go for it.
Um, I'm sorry, because it's for students. It was a
Right.
subscription that students could get, that was supposed to help them with their homework. What that
Yeah,
really meant was it gave them the answer keys to the various textbooks, and lot of sites for cheating on your homework,
yeah.
that was there for a nice monthly subscription of $10 to $20 of a student, with what's happening. ChatGPT came 2 years ago, and all of a sudden students realized they could do the exact same thing. They could simply ChatGPT the questions rather than going and looking at Chegg, and it actually would give them customized answers, and it was a little less likely to get caught, etc. So Chegg has seen a dramatic drop in their
Mm.
revenue, and they announced a 22% workforce cut, as they're trying to figure out what they can do to pivot and still save their business.
Interesting. Now, we also saw the same. I know as a topic we want to talk about at some point is Barnes and Noble. When Barnes and Noble, when the CEO came in, he did something similar. He was restructuring the business and he cut 50% of their headquarters employees. So again, feeling company massive pivot in how they're going to approach the business, and so they did a deep cut. And when you said 22% of Chegg's workforce, that actually seems light to me. I don't know what the revenue cuts are, but if your fundamental market has changed, I as a leader, I might actually pull back further. I don't know what it takes to sustain their system though. So like what they need
I don't know
operationally.
either.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert there. But, you know, we also are seeing them throughout, because my world is higher ed
Hmm.
in right now. We're seeing a lot of that happening, especially in smaller colleges right now. We're seeing a drop in the number of students who are going to traditional colleges. There are a lot of them in massive deficits, and so you're starting to see quite a bit of layoffs in, higher ed
Right.
as well. Now, every single one seems to hit headlines locally and not nationally, but it is an issue that's
Right.
going on. But again, it's because there's a fundamental change in the
Right.
business, and you're trying to keep up with it. You're trying to right size your business, right? That's the point of these particular layoffs. Now, the advantage to the employee, it's not like it's a surprise that it's coming, right? It's not like these type of items happen overnight. You know, when you have a fundamental trade, you try to right size your business. And that's the appropriate use of layoffs, right? To right size your business.
But okay, and so I would say it appropriate is a judgment. So right. Mm,
But
y-
that's the big advantage though, right?
that's
You it's not like it's a surprise,
right.
right?
Well,
You
okay.
know it's coming at that
Yeah.
point. That's
And
the good news. If
okay,
there is
I
any
agree.
good news.
I agree. Now, the interesting thing, having worked in a global organization, if you're laid off in the United States, there is no government regulated package. Now, that's the one thing I want to put out there, that if you've got a company that's failing and you get laid off, I think the odds of you getting a reasonable, again, a judgment, a settlement, some sort of a settlement or a separation package that gives you enough time to find another job, I think your odds actually go down because the company is in financial dire straits, right?
Yes.
So, yes, you may have advanced warning, maybe already looking for a job, but uh, European countries tend to regulate the separation of an organization, but the U.S. doesn't have those types of regulations. So if you have the good fortune of the company being able to pay you, that's great, but you may only get 2 weeks or nothing. But I think
Yeah.
2 weeks is kind of like the general rule.
Yeah.
Now, when we look at these other types of cuts and we talk about appropriate or acceptable, I know this is where we get into a gray area. So, companies are doing this all the time. You mentioned GE. This is a Jack Welch management philosophy that Microsoft picked up through Steve Ballmer, that Cisco Systems picked up through John Chambers. They were all huge fans of Jack Welch, and they implemented his rank and yank. So, philosophy: stack rank your team. There always has to be 10% on the bottom. And now, in the companies that I was a part of, you were supposed to manage them out. Labor laws in the U.S. do make it a little bit difficult sometimes to do that managing out, but it's really you should be coaching them up, right? But in those philosophies, if you had somebody in the bottom performer, you were also almost seen as uh, contrary. You weren't doing your job as a manager if you actually coached them up. So it created this environment where you ended up pushing people to the bottom and forcing them out and not giving them an opportunity to improve, because you as a manager were graded if you didn't get rid of the people. So you can imagine this really competitive nature, and it was competitive on purpose, right? They wanted people to compete so that they would try to outperform each other. And it created a really toxic environment where people hoarded information, where they sabotaged each other, and people hated it. And so most of them got rid of it, right? So we don't
Yeah.
see that as often anymore.
No, Microsoft got rid of it in 2013.
Yep.
So yes, we aren't seeing that many stack ranked and cut the bottom 10% anymore. And it's a good thing,
Right.
I think, because layoffs should not be performance management,
Right. Agreed.
right? And are they really layoffs at that point? I mean, we simply people get fired all the time. It's simply when it becomes systemic that we decide to use the nicer term layoff.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. So now we see companies using it for expense management.
Yes.
And so that's where I think you and I both agree is this really inappropriate use of the layoff, or the whole mechanism. So in my experience, most layoffs have been done largely due to expense management. They're not cutting entire organizations out. We're saying we're exiting this business so we can focus on this business, which I think you and I would agree is a good use of a layoff, right? A restructuring. And now whether the people exit the company or they're repurposed into something else, I mean, that's a whole discussion. But the idea is that choosing to shift your focus is generally a good way, a good approach to a layoff. But most of the time, I see it as an expense management. It's a very expensive expense management tool, but it's a longer term one. So, yeah. So, what do you want to know about it?
Well, okay. Yeah, you're right. It is expensive. So tell me about your experience. You're the manager who has to do the layoffs. Number one, have you always agreed with the reason? Number two, take me into that day, the day that the announcement comes. What did you have to do?
So, did I ever agree with a reason? Yes and no. Yes, in that organizations just tend to grow too big. Think about the process of adding headcount. You add headcount, you rarely take away headcount. And the way that companies manage their headcount spend is they freeze requisitions, right? So companies just tend to grow and grow and grow. They don't shrink. And if we equate that with what's happened with the government, like it's very similar. The government never went through sort of a decrease. It was always a growth thing. So you've got to have some sort of mechanism either to cut that growth or to control the growth. Warren Buffett controlled the growth. He never had that problem in his headquarters company because he had very rigorous rules in place on when you would put people in specific jobs. But most corporations or most organizations don't have those strict rules, and that those decisions to put people in roles, it tends to be more emotional than it is following some sort of criteria. So I do agree that companies need to have a mechanism to right size their workforce. But what typically happens is the company just recognizes that it is too big, and they issue a blanket, you need to reduce your headcount by 5%, or you need to reduce your spend by 5% or 10% or something like that. And they sometimes will put a little more emphasis on one area than another, but it's been my experience that they tend to peanut butter spread those cuts. So the why they do it, I understand the reasons why. I don't know that I always agree with the execution behind it. And then typically what happens is the whole thing is done on spreadsheets. That's been my experience. And you have a list of names of everybody in your organization, and you essentially identify who's staying and who's leaving. And in a lot of cases, there is a dollar sign next to their name, which is their fully loaded cost. So you can see like how much, if I cut this person, it saves me this money. If I cut this person, it saves me this money. And it's a bit of a negotiation. In some organizations, they consult the frontline manager to see how people are doing, or they may have rolled up a performance review at some point to give you insights. So you don't necessarily know where the decision is being made. Frequently, it is not the first line manager making the decision, but often they're the ones who have to deliver the news. So that's a little bit behind the scenes. Any questions about
Mhm.
that before I go into the day?
So have you ever, I guess, seen the list that you were given and be like, "Oh, that was a bad decision?"
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
and
yeah.
and have you ever been able to push back and go back up and say, "Actually, this person would be better than this person?"
I've never seen that happen personally. Most of the time, if you're not making the decision, by the time that the decision is made, it's too late.
Okay.
Yeah, it, when my in my experience, these are relatively long processes. It takes at least a month to conduct one, if not 2 months, because you have to collect the names. There's packages, all the systems that have to go into place. But yes, I've disagreed with it, but I don't find that fighting it is very effective. What I've done in the past is when I've identified someone that I don't feel should have been impacted, like really an asset to the organization, I find them a job somewhere else. Right. So my goal is to get them employed so that we don't lose those skills, so that we can potentially fix it at some point in the future, like fix it according to my view of the world. Right. So
Makes sense.
the interesting thing, so this is a devastating process across the board. So as humans, we're wired for survival. And there's two things that happen in a layoff that I don't think most organizations recognize. The first one, organizations do recognize that you're going to deprive a person of their income. And that income is what they use for the basics in Maslow's hierarchy, my shelter, my food, right? Provide for my family. Everybody recognizes that that's going to happen. What they don't recognize is that like 70% of people identify themselves, their entire identity is their work. So psychologically, we basically ostracize people, and we literally do this um, when we lay off an individual. Often they're told, "Don't do your work anymore. That is not your job anymore. Your job is to find a new job." So so we think we're doing them a favor, but we cut them off at the knees. We remove their income and their identity all at the same time. It is a horrific process, right, for the other individual. The people that we don't often think about is the manager. The first time I ever had to do a layoff, I did not make the choice as to who was going to be impacted. It was a performance decision. We were given expense cuts. It was a performance decision. I had just hired. I was a senior manager. I had just hired a new manager in place, and it was her direct report that was going to be impacted. And I was not comfortable saying, "Hi, new manager, who also didn't make this decision. You have to lay off this person." So I did it myself. I was like, I did not want to do that to a new manager. Uh, but I had panic attacks for a month because I all I could think about was impacting someone's life. And so it's devastating to managers who not only think about or have empathy for the people that they're working with, but anticipate it coming. So they live with this knowledge for weeks or months, and it's a terrible thing, and it's a productivity drain for managers as well. So I can tell you that the days I've had to do it, if I've had to do more than one, I block time between them. I've done the thing that you're not supposed to do. I've cried in them. And it's not about me, it's about them, right? Those kinds of things. I've done all the things you're not supposed to do. I went off script. You're given a script because you don't want to get sued. And I have gone off script. And largely I do it because the script is very cold. And I don't feel that, I just don't think that's the right way to do it. Yes, I appreciate that we don't want to get sued, but what I really want to do is make sure that the person that I'm talking to recognizes that I actually care about them as an individual, and that the decision is not a judgment on who they are. Right. So, I mean, that's kind of the high level behind the scenes. I'm sure you have other questions that I can fill in, but it's generally an all around terrible experience. The employee does get resources, and the managers do not. I want to call that out. There is no mental health resource for the manager who is sitting with this information, but there's always resources for the employee. Don't know if they're helpful or not, but it's just something that I've noticed.
That is a really interesting comment at the end, I gotta say. Never really thought about that, to be honest. The PTSD of having to be the
Yeah.
person who delivers the information, even if you are surviving. I know about survivor's guilt.
Yes.
So there are studies out there that do show that people who survive a layoff, and see their coworkers go around disappear, feel guilty, and they have some emotional issues associated with that. But I don't think we allow managers to feel that. I don't think that that's a part of the capitalist society, right? It's that you did your job and you're a manager, so you should be able to handle it. That's why we made you the manager. Isn't that
Right.
the attitude?
That's the attitude. Yeah, yeah. But I think we just forget that our managers are humans too. So I do think that's something that needs to change in the process. I also think the process needs to change in general, and um, that's one of the questions that I think I have is um, now that we're seeing this happen more frequently, do we, and the research is out there that shows that when you do repeated layoffs, and companies we're seeing a lot of tech companies do repeated layoffs. You just said Microsoft 3%. We're going to see a lot more layoffs now because of AI. Um, do you think that investors will begin to see the research and recognize that the overall performance of individuals in an organization starts to decline because they are worried about their survival, right? People are worried and they're
I
disengaging. Will investors get involved? No?
No. I don't see it happening. So I will say that until culture becomes a problem, um, man, investors don't think about it. They see layoffs, they see a 3% work cut, and they go, okay, well, that means margins can expand
Hmm.
by 30 basis points or 50 basis points, or they're doing what they need to do in order to meet my numbers because
Okay.
that's what it is. And as I said, I've never been a part of a layoff, and I have been on the other side in the finance world seeing layoffs.
Hmm.
All the time. I was a banking analyst in 2008. There's a ton of layoffs,
Hmm. Yeah.
associated with that. Um, and that is like, it never occurred to me. I'm just gonna be honest. It never occurred to me. There was ever occasional, so I'd be like, "Oh, those poor people." And then I'm like, "Oh, and this is what's gonna happen to my model." They literally
Yeah.
are numbers on a
Right.
spreadsheet. They're not humans, they're not workers, they're a percentage of a function. That's really what investors are thinking.
Right. Okay. So
Now
you said when culture becomes a problem. How do you know that culture is a problem? And that's because all the research is telling us that this is bad for companies. And I've seen it. It's bad for companies, right? If if I were in charge, and nobody's going to put me in charge, but I think the question I would be asking is, do I do three layoffs or do I cut really, really deep ones?
I don't have an answer for you as far as, like, when does culture become a problem? When a scandal erupts? When I can't get my earnings to grow or my revenue to grow because of my cultural issues. That's when it becomes a problem, right? So we can go to Wells Fargo, for instance, right?
Mhm.
They had a performance management system in there, and people were actually doing illegal things in there,
Right.
in order to meet it so that they would not be a part of layoffs, that they would not get fired, that they would meet the goals associated
Mhm.
with it. It turned out to be an incredibly toxic culture that was up until the point that we found out about the illegal actions that were going on. Wall Street celebrated. Like, we were like, "Oh my gosh, Wells Fargo is so much better than JP Morgan and Bank of America. Look at these results. Look at this
Right.
ecosystem, 8.6 products per customer. Oh my goodness, they're locked in. There's switching costs. We're only thinking about the results.
Right.
We're not thinking about the inputs that are happening there. The culture side of it is something that we use as an explanation for the numbers.
Okay.
It's really an afterthought. It's not a culture first attitude. That's something that happens inside of an organization. Now, with that being said, I got to tell you, most finance companies are really cutthroat, right? So, if you go to especially Wall Street itself, you're going to find layoffs are very, very common. It is a highly competitive.
Yeah.
The most common duration, of analysts are 2 years. You're in and out. They purposely process you through. They are, what do they call them? Burn and churn
Right.
factories, right? They do not last. Actually, really interesting. I don't know if you saw the article the other day, but Jamie Dimon came out. He was so mad. This burn and churn had created a very weird culture inside of his own where people were actually interviewing for jobs while still in their management training programs or something like that, that could be dated a year from now. 2 years from now, go work for JP Morgan, get this, and then we will hire you because we know you knew that the number of people who survived that second year cut
Right.
was only going to be 50% or 40%. And so people were already lining up jobs in advance of knowing that was happening. So
Wow.
that data thing. But Jamie Dimon's pissed. He's pissed. And he actually came out, like a week ago, earlier this week, and basically said, if you find a job that is post dated, if we find out you've done this, you are fired that day.
Wow.
Because it wasn't working to his advantage. And not surprisingly, that cutthroat nature of a system, people started playing
Right.
the game. They
Right. Of
started playing
course.
the game on the company rather than the company just playing the game on them.
Right. Which makes sense. And so, and there's no loyalty, right? We were talking earlier about a culture of loyalty, mutual loyalty. People have loyalty to the company, and companies have loyalty to people. That doesn't exist anymore. And so I think that will work. That approach will work for Wall Street until there's an alternative. And there will
Yeah.
be an alternative. Someone will build an alternative. Probably one of those people that gets fired for looking for another job. But okay, but going back to like the concept of layoffs and investors. So this, I think the crux of this conversation gets down to short-term versus long-term. And at what point will investors say, okay, if you do 10 layoffs within 3 years, my long-term results are going to be so terrible that this is a problem for me, right? So is that ever
So it will
a
be.
concern?
It will be. So let's algorithmic trading and all this big data and stuff like that. We're always looking for new correlations.
Mhm.
What in the past can predict the future pricing and stuff like that. And I find it interesting that you're suggesting that this may be something. And I have a feeling somebody out there has already done this, and I
Of
have
course.
not found that research that's there. But it would be a really interesting study to see announced layoffs in 5 years, and then post date it, do the linear regression and see, are there consistent ones if you have consistent layoffs? But then you need to decide what is a layoff and what is not, because I think we're going to go back to that original conversation, which is, what is an actual layoff?
Yeah.
Is it, because there are still companies that do the stack ranked performance management, that's there. Are layoffs for performance management the issue? Or are layoffs because you just grew too big the issue? Or what type of layoffs are going to count as
Interesting.
layoffs?
Interesting.
Because I don't know. I mean, Microsoft, 3%, right? But they said it's performance based.
Right.
So in other words, it actually sounds a lot more like something like that, or that's it's a performance management. Whereas Bank of America, was a bank, no, Citigroup. Citigroup announced a big layoff this year too, but it's all in China. It's an entire
Right.
division that is getting removed, basically, that's happening. So is that the type of layoff you're talking about that's going to result in future items? Is it a combination? If you simply have any type of layoff, is that there? And what qualifies as a layoff? 1% of workforce,
Mm,
3% of workforce? What's the natural firing rate of a company just for bad performance?
yeah.
It's so hard to make a choice, but
Right.
I'm pretty sure that data is getting collected. And until we see statistics out there that show us right there in plain face, I'm losing money because of these layoffs, that's there. And the question
Interesting.
becomes, are they going to go away? I don't think they will,
No.
but we may come up with a new name.
Of course. Of course. That I agree. That I agree. Okay. Well, that's a study I think you and I should do. I'm just saying because I know we're both fascinated by this topic together. So, and I really do think that there is a correlation there between between performance and whatever you want to call it. And I think it's only going to become increasingly um, revealed. That's not the right word. We're gonna become more aware of it. It's gonna become more prominent because we will see companies laying people off because they're getting efficiencies from AI. And so people will hunker down more and more and more. So I think we're going to see this concept of protecting the base, or defending against technologies, or disengaging because I think I might lose my job. I just think we're going to see that get amplified. And will investors care about the impact of that type of behavior on their returns, or will it just happen? And we'll
Yeah. I also wonder, why do companies announce these?
Yeah,
Do they
when they're not
perform,
required to
or is
unless
it
they lay
really?
off more than 10%, right? I
Yeah.
think it's 10% of your workforce in the US, you're obligated to announce it. I don't know the answer. The only thing I can come up with, Jamie, is that they're doing it to talk to investors like you so that you update your model.
It's possible that it's that way. It's also possible that it's simply because it's going to happen either way, and to have it leaked
Oh,
from
controlled
a
narrative.
site. I mean, there are websites that track layoffs, right? There are inside sites that talk about what's going on inside of a company, and they're saying, "Hey, there's a rumor of layoffs," that type of thing. And so maybe it's an attempt to get ahead of the rumors.
Interesting.
But if you're management and you're thinking about doing these, what is the play there? How quiet can you keep it? How long can you keep it quiet? Do you keep it quiet? It's a really interesting conversation because there's also the idea that if I announce there's going to be layoffs and I'm worried that it's going to be in my um, area,
Mhm.
what is the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to put my resume together. I'm going to start looking for another job,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so I may avoid having to have the conversation with you because
Right.
I may choose to voluntarily disappear already,
Right.
right? So there's that signaling effect
Yep.
that can happen as well. And in every layoff, that is announced, there's going to be at least a small amount of that.
Mhm.
There's also scramble of internal transfers at that point
Right.
that can happen. But I just don't. I don't think that they're gonna go away anytime soon. Um, I just think that they're going uh, I think they're just going to continue. Yeah, I don't have any great answer.
Yeah.
Like, we may change the name. We may distinguish between performance management layoffs and more general corporate ones, but, it's gonna be continuing to be crappy, and let's be honest, there's no perfect culture.
Oh,
Like, what
goodness.
is the other solution? If I don't lay it off, I become bloated.
Right.
And that's
Agreed.
no answer either,
Agreed.
right? So until we can solve the hiring issue, we have to stick with the layoff issue.
Agreed. Yeah. Well, this is one I think we'll stay close to because we're talking about this now because we know that companies are signaling that they're going to increase their layoffs. We wanted to talk a little bit about the decisions that face leaders. I think the one that will be most interesting for us to follow right now is the public nature of the announcement. So, are they super public about saying that they're laying folks off? What's the terminology they're using? I really do believe that the words that they're using are all about talking to investors like you, nothing to do with the people inside. And will we see more correlation between increased layoffs and decreased productivity? I think those are all things that are going to be fascinating to stay in touch with.
I agree. I agree.
Awesome.
This is interesting.
Yes, yeah, a sad topic, but I'm glad it's one that we can talk about openly.
Yeah, agreed. All right. Well,
Thanks, Jamie.
until next time, Cindy.